Hi, everyone. Whether or not you spent the weekend wearing your heaviest parka, you have probably found your attention straying to the mountains of Utah. That is where the Sundance Film Festival is right now in full swing. I am covering Sundance remotely, which means I haven't seen much of anything until the digital platform becomes available later this week. But my Ankler colleague, executive editor Alison is there in Park City, and she's joining me on today's episode to talk about the highlights of the festival so far, and then even what Oscar buzz might be for some of these films when next season rolls around. I'm Katey Rich, and this is the Prestige Junkie Podcast. Alison, thank you for being on this podcast for the first time. First of many times, I would say. People are going to have to get used to your voice since you and I are in some ways navigating award season and festival season and everything else together. So thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So when we were talking about Sundance like weeks ago, when we were kind of figuring out who all was going to go, I think you told me you love Sundance, like that it felt important to you to go back to Sundance. And I remember having mixed feelings about the festival. I loved going a while ago, but I also hate riding shuttle buses and would rather not pack snow boots and a suitcase if I don't have to. So to start, why do you love Sundance so much? Not just this year's festival, but in general. What feels important to you about Sundance on the calendar?
Well, I enjoy tromping around in the snow and taking shuttle buses and meeting people from the industry and hearing just kind of the vibe around not just film, but the entire industry, because a lot of people do come to town. The indie film market has changed a lot since my first time here, which I think was 2015. And it's certainly not as many hot market deals and that sort of thing happening here. But people still do come. And it's especially rich, I would say, for the documentary community. That's still a really big component here. That said, this year, it's a little quieter. I think that is a function of the changes in the marketplace. Things have been getting quieter in that way every year. And this year, too, I think the effect of the fires, there maybe is a slightly lower attendance rate from LA. Yeah. I mean, and not to say it's still very lively. You know, I caught a flash mob, on Main Street. They blocked off Main Street.
I had no idea.
They blocked off Main Street, and there's still a lot going on. But I would say there's just kind of like a, 5 to 10%, just a little bit less frenzied than in recent years, which is nice as well.
Yeah, I just feel like the general thought process about indie filmmaking is not that it's impossible to be done. The Brutalist is out here getting all its Oscar nominations, but making an indie film is such an uphill battle in the best of times, and we haven't been in the best of times for such a long time. And do you get to Sundance and do you sense that pessimism, or is it kind of the place where hope springs eternal? Who knows? Maybe one of these will be the next Little Miss Sunshine.
Honestly, there's a little bit of both, because people do get here and get immersed in the movies and immersed in the art and the celebration of independent filmmaking. And we're so saturated with it. The pre-roll before every movie just reminds you of the history of Sundance, the movies that have come out of here. So you're never far from that. At the same time, people are realistic, but it's also sort of nice because you mix in, there's a lot of festival goers who don't work in Hollywood and are just people who are local or love film and come. And so you're also getting to see these films and these premieres with people who just love them and are excited to get an insight into something, before the rest of the world sees it.
Yeah.
But I would say mostly people still kind of hold out hope when you come. They still are excited that they might get the deal and that this might be the launch pad for them.
Yeah, I mean, why would you come all the way to Park City if you don't have hope, right? What's the point? Do you think that the famous Sundance fever is still in effect, where at 20,000 feet above sea level, a movie seems like a masterpiece, and then you get home and you realize it's a piece of junk? Have you noticed any of that this year?
I would say absolutely not this year. The first couple days, the festival has been a little star-crossed. And I love Sundance. I would never want to take it down. But there just were a few weird glitches. The main theater where the big premieres happen, which is called Eccles, had some sound issues on the first day.
I heard about that.
And the sound cut out during Twinless, which is one of the most popular movies so far of the festival. The sound cut out during the Sly Stone documentary from Questlove, which was a bummer because, you don't want to lose sound on just for a second and a half, but it happened like 20 times during the movie. So people got really frustrated.
Yeah.
And then the first couple of narrative films that I was hearing about from people, there was not a ton of enthusiasm. But in the last day or two, I've been hearing more things that people were excited about. Plus, on top of everything, they are planning to change the location of Sundance, not next year, but the year after. And that is a big question that everybody talks about everywhere you go. Again, the industry people and the local people as well, who are business people. Like, where's it going to go? What's going to happen? Are they really going to go? One person I talked to who has spoken with the festival people said they seem more excited about Cincinnati than one might have expected.
Okay.
My personal guess is, and it's just a guess because I really feel that it's definitely not a done deal yet. If I had to put money on it, I would say they'll stay in Utah, and it just moves much more towards Salt Lake City.
Yeah.
With fewer events here in Park City.
Because there are hotels in Salt Lake City as opposed to in Park City where it's impossible to find anywhere to stay.
Yeah, there's a lot more infrastructure and also, I think, more diversity, more different types of communities, more, there's college students there, things that bring a different vibe to the whole area. It's much bigger, obviously, too.
Yeah. So we're recording on Monday, and as of now, there haven't really been any big deals. No one's gotten, the real paying pickup for $10 million from Searchlight yet. A24 brought a bunch of movies. We may talk about some of those, but for the most part, everything is still, out there searching for a home. So just to start by talking about titles, you already mentioned Twinless, which I sort of knew about. It's one of those things with Sundance where a title rings a vague bell, but you can't remember if this one that has this star or that star. But it seems to have really emerged from the scrum. And Dylan O'Brien, who is famous for a lot of people and not for me. I now mostly know as Dan Aykroyd in the Saturday Night Live movie. Seems to be having a pretty good festival. So what's the deal with Twinless?
People seem to really like it. And if you read the reports on Friday night, it was despite those sound problems, there was a warm welcome for Twinless. It's he plays a bereaved twin who meets another bereaved twin at a twin bereavement group. And apparently people just really liked it. It was a solid start. And it's the only film that I've heard about where they're getting calls about a deal. I haven't heard about any deal yet, but the calls started happening within 24 hours of that premiere.
Okay.
And that may have a lot to do with him because he is getting to be a bigger star. He's definitely on the rise, Dylan O'Brien.
That's the thing about so many of these Sundance movies. It's even if they get terrible reviews, if they have a star in them, someone somewhere will pick it up. It'll be played on Tubi or on an airplane or something like that. So the financials it's not like they're not related to the quality of the movie, but the market is kind of a whole different beast when it comes to what's getting picked up at Sundance.
Definitely.
So you also said that you saw Sly Lives despite the sound problems. Did you see it in the theater with the sound dropping out like a true?
Yes.
So I watched it in my house, which I've gotten an early look at a couple of things and got to see that one. That just seems like such a uniquely terrible one to have sound problems. But
absolutely. And it was pretty dramatic because actually halfway through the film, they paused the film. Festival director Eugene Hernandez came out and said, "It's not the film, it's our tech that we're using today. And I'm really sorry, and please just, try and enjoy the rest of the film."
Yeah.
And, when Questlove came out at the end with some of his fellow filmmakers, it was all enthusiasm and plugging the Hulu premiere of the film.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, how does it feel watching a premiere in a theater knowing it's coming to Hulu in, I guess, a couple of weeks? His Summer of Soul, which won the Oscar, was mostly a digital release. It was in a COVID year, so it's not unheard of for this documentary. But it is kind of movie theaters, what are those?
Yeah, I think, too, when you mentioned Summer of Soul, that was such a dramatic first outing for him. It was such a huge success and, went on to do so well. And Sly Lives, which is also an amazing film about someone whose music I know, but I really didn't know a lot about his life. It feels sort of like a spin-off chapter of Summer of Soul, a wonderful movie, but doesn't quite have the scope and surprise of that earlier effort.
It's interesting, and I would like to hear from Questlove about this, that Sly Stone is still alive, and at the end of the movie, you kind of get his children talking about basically how he's living now is just kind of like a quiet, individual life. He's, had many publicized problems with drugs. He seems to have gotten past that now, and you really want him to be part of that movie. And Questlove wrote the introduction to his autobiography that came out a couple of years ago, so clearly there's a relationship there. So I'm curious about if he just tried to do that and couldn't get there in the end. And the footage is so good, you don't feel like it's missing something, but it sure wouldn't have been bad to have his voice in there in the present day.
It was, it was interesting that the children's pieces really did give you a picture because there were 3 different kids from different moms and they have different kinds of relationships with him. And they are very funny and sweet about where he is now. So you actually get sort of a feel for where he is. And of course, you wonder why you didn't hear from him. But it's also, you don't feel unsatisfied. I didn't anyway. Yeah. I felt like he made a choice and he's a guy who's been through a lot. And this is where
who would dare disturb his peace when he's worked this hard for it? I want to keep talking about documentaries since, as you said, it can be such a good festival for docs. But you also saw what I think might be the highest profile movie that's premiered thus far, which is Kiss of the Spider-Woman, the J-Lo Sundance movie. Whoever thought we would get to say such a thing? So, and it's not only a J-Lo Sundance movie that's adapted from a Broadway musical, but it's pretty good.
I love musicals. I love movies. I am not a critic. I mean, I have a critical eye, of course. I don't love everything, but I go into these things with a lot of enthusiasm. But it was a lot better than I thought it would be.
Okay.
The original material is complicated. Most people think of it as lesser, Candor and Ebb, not one of their greatest shows. But Bill Condon is, a great musical director and has a lot of passion for Hollywood 50s musicals. And without getting into, it's kind of a complex plot, but it's, there's two prisoners in Argentina, and then one of them has a very powerful, imaginative life where he worships these stars of 50s musicals. And so there's a film within the film, and that's J-Lo is the star of the film within the film and does a ton of incredible song and dance numbers, really glamorous. She's such a great dancer. Like, you're really just reminded that she's a star. I mean, she's a triple threat. She can sing, she can dance, she can act. She's an icon. And in the Q&A after, Eugene, the festival director, said to her, Jennifer Lopez, I don't know you, but it seems like this movie was made for you, or you were made for this movie, or whatever, whichever it was. And it really felt like that. So, and the two actors, Diego Luna, and I have not nailed the pronunciation of Tonatiuh's name yet. I'm not exactly sure.
I've only seen that name written down, so your guess is as good as mine.
They also were both phenomenal. So, I think it was a lower budget movie for a big musical, and I think that shows in some parts and some of the editing and some things, but certainly not in those 50s musical numbers. Those were incredible. And it's a complicated package. The ending, there's a few endings, but it was a lot better than I thought it would be. It was very exciting. People afterwards seemed excited. And J-Lo came out on stage in this, sparkly spider sheer dress that was not very Sundance. And you thought she just decided to...
Everyone's always bring jeans at those premieres.
She just decided to come as J-Lo, and I think people appreciated that too. So I guess Kiss of the Spider-Woman was a movie before it was a stage show. The movie in the 80s that starred William Hurt that won him an Oscar. I watched it for the first time a couple years ago, and it feels dated in many ways, including casting William Hurt as an Argentinian, gay,
trans identifying person. But I was surprised how much I liked it despite that. And I feel like there's such a powerful relationship between these two prisoners and kind of the real world part of the story that it can kind of, a lot of times if a movie has good fantasy sequences, then reality feels very boring. So it feels like there's a lot of potential, especially I had heard that Tonatiuh's performance in that role that William Hurt originally played was a real standout. So that's a cool Star is Born moment.
Quite incredible. I have seen the original movie. I don't remember it that well. I also saw the Broadway show in the 90s. And that was a big moment for Chita Rivera in her career and really an iconic turn for her. And there was mention of her during the remarks. And also there's a thank you to her at the end of the movie, along with Fred Ebb and Terrence McNally. But when it comes to those trans representation issues and gay representation issues, from people I spoke to who had more recently seen the other one to remind themselves, those things are very much updated. And the contemporary film...
you'd never get your movie made if you didn't...
No, you would have to, but apparently very effectively, very effectively without losing some of the things that were part of the original and part of the novel, so...
Has anyone answered the question of why this movie is at Sundance? It feels not very Sundance-y.
Well, Eugene did speak about Gods and Monsters premiered at Sundance. And so Bill Condon actually does have a long history with Sundance.
That's cool.
And it's an artist equity production, which is that sort of artist-based production company that...
That's the Ben Affleck, Matt Damon company?
Ben Affleck and Matt Damon, and also New Yorican, J-Lo's production company is involved. But it is two very independent finance entities, and it doesn't have distribution yet. So that qualifies it for Sundance. And I guess they were ready. I feel, in his opening remarks, Bill Condon read from the executive order declaring only two genders in the U.S. That was signed a few days ago by new President Trump. And he really, I think he wanted He almost wanted to get it out before the election, he said, because he felt that the trans issues were so important. So maybe he didn't want to wait. Even there were people at the bus stop after saying, that felt more like a Cannes premiere, or that felt more like a TIFF Gala premiere.
Sure.
Not criticizing, but just saying that. And I think maybe he just didn't want to wait.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's a broader question, too. I mean, we think of Sundance, which had its own Women's March in 2017. Like, as in terms of political films, you're going to find plenty of them there. Like, I don't know what the vibe feels like. We on last week's podcast, I was talking about how the Oscar nominations felt more pointedly political than I expected. Has Sundance felt that way as well?
I've seen a couple of documentaries, so that's always present in those rooms.
Sure.
I would say it feels about the same, and maybe even that there's a little more openness. And I would say this would be true over the past couple of years as we've seen our sort of culture shift a little bit more to embracing between the coasts and, the different points of view. I think there's more openness here to films that are just sweet and good storytelling and fun and funny. And, I think it's okay for movies here to just be an original narrative that was somebody's passion. It doesn't necessarily have to have a crazy twist or have an incredible message. A couple things I've seen would fall into that category of just, original filmmaking, but, just a story.
Yeah. Well, before we jump into the docs, I did want to hear about any other narrative films you've seen that you like or that you just keep hearing good things about.
Well, I mentioned to you before I went, there's a film called Ricky that's made by this filmmaker, Rashad Fred. And what is nice about this movie is it was Sundance bred. He came through both the writer's lab and the director's lab. He's an Army veteran. This is a movie about how incarceration affects families and how people can avoid, recidivism. And it stars Stephen James, who's wonderful in it. And so that was terrific. And just a very sentimental moment, I think, for Rashad and for Sundance to have that come out in Eccles. And I also saw a really interesting movie yesterday morning, Train Dreams. I think that one also came in with distribution. It's Joel Edgerton as a sort of a logger at the turn of the century, turn of the 20th century, and sort of moving into the modern world and living his life very quiet, very dreamy and beautiful. And something I probably wouldn't have discovered anywhere but Sundance. But
well, it's made by the Sing Sing team, right? It's
made by the Sing Sing team, so that was a lot of excitement. Yeah, there was a lot of excitement for that. And actually, I think in a way, they could actually sell this as with an appeal to sort of, for lack of a better word, red state, since it's about a sort of a traditional working man and his traditional life, even though it's got an arty presentation.
Okay.
And then one that I haven't seen yet, but that people really love, is already owned by Focus, is the Carey Mulligan, The Ballad of Wallace Island. I heard that was really wonderful. So.
Yeah, I read a review that compared it to John Carney favorably. I love a John Carney movie. It's like two former folk musicians, they were in a band together and they get kind of reunited by surprise by some fan on an island. It seems like just really charming. And Focus has had a couple movies over the past few years premiere at Sundance and then go to theaters pretty soon after in March. 1001, the Tiana Taylor movie a couple of years ago. So I'm kind of interested about this movie that doesn't seem like it's going to be very awardsy despite the presence of Carey Mulligan, but it's something nice to look forward to in March. I'll be grateful for that.
I heard it was quirky and amazing.
Sounds great. Yeah, usually often at Sundance you get quirky and dreadful. So the other one, yes, I don't think the one I don't think you've seen either, and I haven't, but it kind of seems to be the consensus masterpiece is If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You, the A24 movie starring Rose Byrne. You haven't seen it yet, right?
I haven't. Our colleague Richard Rushfield saw it and really liked it, and it was in his top 2 when he was leaving this morning. So,
did he only have 2 films he liked, and that's why it's the top 2, or what's?
I'm afraid so.
Oh no! Okay, we'll have to catch up with Richard later on to hear about the
I
disasters.
can mention one other that, again, before we move on to documentaries, that I liked more than he did. And I liked more than most of the men I know who saw it, which is this sort of quirky romantic comedy from Sophie Brooks called Oh Hi.
Okay.
And it has Molly Gordon, I think is her name, from The Bear, and Logan Lerman, and a sort of a weekend away goes wrong between a newly dating couple. And there's just a lot about not so much the sort of Tinder swipe and that culture, but just what kind of intimacy and level of commitment young people in relationships want, what men want versus what women want, what looks crazy in a woman but is very relatable for a lot of women. So I don't want to give too much away, but I felt like it wasn't like a great film overall. There were some questions about it, but I will keep thinking about it because of those issues about dating, even though my dating years are well behind me. And I think even the guys who didn't like it and objected to some of the present, I think it's the kind of movie that'll stick with you, even if it's not like not like a 5-star movie.
I'll look up for that one. Okay, let's talk documentaries. And you have seen the movie that I couldn't tell if it was intended as a mystery. So the description of Bao Wen's The Stringer was saying that it was uncovering the true identity of the photographer behind one of the most famous images of the 20th century. And I had talked to a couple of people who wondered which image we're talking about here. And you have seen it. Is it supposed to be a mystery what image we're talking about? And is the movie more than just this guessing game?
They actually, I don't know if it was the filmmakers or the Associated Press that revealed the exact photo, maybe 3 days before the premiere.
Okay.
It is the photo that we call Napalm Girl, which is of the young girl in Vietnam running naked away from a napalm attack. And it's a very powerful image and is credited appropriately with changing the Western view of the war and really driving, much more quickly toward a resolution and getting the U.S. out of Vietnam. It has long been credited to an AP photographer based in Vietnam named Nick Ut. And there were rumors among correspondents in Vietnam, and particularly among the photography community there, that it had actually been taken by a stringer who was also Vietnamese.
Explain stringer for people who have not worked for newspapers.
Or someone who goes out and takes pictures, and they come, at the end of the day and offer up their film. I mean, this was the 70s, so it was film. Offer up their film, and they get paid, $20 if the AP buys their picture. And that was this guy's experience with his work. Typically, his name is Nguyen Nye. And so there was another photographer called Gary Knight who heard about this question and started investigating it. And then he got we follow, I don't want to give, now I won't give too much away, but we follow this very elaborate investigation that involves, photographic forensics and finding relatives in Vietnam, finding other people who were there on that day and what happened. And, it was very emotional at the premiere because the man that the film feels was the film, convinced me, not 100%, but I found it very convincing. That person actually was present at the premiere and spoke afterwards. He doesn't speak English, but he spoke through a translator. And it was very emotional and dramatic. And it really, as a journalist, it gets you thinking about who owns the story and how do these things happen. And, Nick Ut has had a 50-year life of receiving awards and becoming a peace activist and has done amazing work with that. But if this is called into question, and the AP has done its own investigation, but they didn't have all the materials that the filmmakers had. And now they will probably do another investigation getting into that as well.
Okay, so obviously at the Ankler, we have a real affection for docs, as does the Sundance Film Festival. So, I mean, before I even ask what's popping off there, what have you liked other than The Stringer doc-wise?
I did really enjoy the Sly Stone movie.
Oh, yeah.
The Stringer overwhelmed me. I mean, I just walked away talking and thinking, and it was emotional. I mean, that was really powerful. I have not seen, but I've heard great things about the Alabama Solution, which is Andrew Jarecki.
So Andrew Jarecki is one of several very acclaimed documentarians who were at the festival this year.
Yeah, and coming up today, I believe, is the Leonard Peltier documentary that David France is behind, who has made a couple docs here as well. Yeah,
Leonard Peltier, who was pardoned by Joe Biden hours before he left office. So the title "Free Leonard Peltier" is now a little out of date. I'm curious about how they work with that.
You could just do a little delete on the
Leonard Peltier
mark on the screen. Another one I heard a bit about was Seeds. That was one that some documentary people I know really liked, but I have seen mostly narrative films, but I'm going to try and see Leonard Peltier today and maybe one other tomorrow.
Yeah, I don't know anything about Seeds. That's a totally new one to me. I had heard good things about Predators, which is about the show To Catch a Predator and kind of uncovering the shadiness. I think the shadiness. I haven't seen it yet. Some maybe questionable policies behind how that show came to be. I mean, the variety of what some of these documentaries about. There's one that's, from Israel called Coexistence My Ass about an activist that's like what there really couldn't be a better title. And the nice thing for me is that here in Durham, North Carolina, there's the Full Frame Festival that happens in April where a lot of these titles wind up coming. So it helps with my FOMO a little bit that I don't feel like I'm just constantly missing out.
Another one that people really thought was wonderful was the Marlee Matlin documentary, which also screened on the first day.
Yeah.
So...
Yeah, I think when I was writing my Sundance preview, you were editing it, and we wound up cutting part of it on there just for the way the piece worked. And I was like, but you know what? I bet it's going to break out. And so now I'm validated.
It was very well reviewed, and everybody I know who saw it really, really loved it. It's, you know how it is when you're here. There's just... You're paralyzed by choice, and you want to see the things that are newsy, and you want to see the things that you're going to love, and you want to see some things that are totally, on the grid of the schedule, but off the grid of maybe your fellow journalists and film lovers, kind of, menus that they have. And, squeezing in more than one or two films in a day is tough. So I will be watching a lot of the projects online as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, a couple of other things that I've gotten to see that was worth shouting out. And again, I'll have access to the digital platform in a few days, so I'll get to see a lot more. But so Love, Brooklyn, which stars Andre Holland, is an example of a Sundance movie that's, about people kind of navigating their way through relationships. And it's set in Brooklyn, obviously. And so kind of has this like a Sundance-y kind of description that you'd think of, where it's like a man who has a relationship with his ex that's still very close, but he's also starting this new relationship, and how can he decide? It's set in Brooklyn. It's got an entirely Black cast and a Black director, and it's kind of set amid the rapid gentrification of Brooklyn, so it's kind of got bigger things on its mind, which I think sets it apart. But I think this has probably happened to you too, where you see a movie and you feel mixed about some aspects of it, but there's just one performance that feels like this total revelation. And for me, that was Nicole Beharie, who plays the ex, who is kind of coming back into the main character's life over and over again. And she's not exactly unknown. She's on the morning show. She's like done well for herself, but I just thought she was so terrific in it. So I'm really hoping that performance gets seen by more people, even if the movie itself is relatively small. And then I also got to see Peter Hujar's Day. Do you know anyone who has seen that one yet? Or...
I did. It was in one of my friends said it was in his top 3.
Yeah. I mean, so Ira Sachs has been to Sundance many, many times. His film Passages was like a little bit of a breakout by his standards. He's always made like pretty small scale movies. And in Peter Hujar's Day, he reunites with Ben Whishaw, who was in Passages. But it's really fascinating. It's like almost an experimental film. So he basically found this tape of this conversation that the photographer Peter Hujar, who worked in the 70s New York, had with his friend, where she asked him to write down everything he'd done in a single day. And it just is that conversation. And it's him and Rebecca Hall, who plays Linda Rosencrantz, who's interviewing him. And they sit in the apartment and they talk about what he did all day. And it's the most mundane stuff about how much it cost him to buy a pack of cigarettes and what it costs to get, take out. But then he also goes and photographs Allen Ginsberg and like gets on the phone with Susan Sontag and Fran Lebowitz. And Passages was kind of this like fun love triangle thing. Then it broke out in a big way. So I don't know if this one would be able to do the same thing. But I feel like Ira Sachs has this kind of growing legion of superfans who will all want to see this one too. Provided it gets
That's
distribution.
a good example of one. When I read the description, I thought, okay, like, I don't know if I want to spend my time at Sundance just watching two people have a conversation. But now maybe I was wrong.
Yeah. Well, like we were talking about Twinless, and you're like, two former twins meet in a twin support group. You're like, oh my God, I cannot believe that's a movie. But then it turns out to be good. It's like it's always a gamble.
There was one that you and I talked about a little bit beforehand called By Design that sounded really interesting and quirky. Juliette Lewis plays a woman who becomes a chair, and then people like her better as the chair. Yeah. It was one of our favorite Sundance descriptions. Perfect description.
I guess I have not seen that one. Have you seen it?
I haven't, and the people I know who saw it were not. It was apparently a little bit too far in the quirky spectrum with not enough to kind of pull you in from what I heard. I also heard sort of mixed, but leaning definitely toward the good things about the Benedict Cumberbatch movie, The Thing with Feathers. It was apparently kind of trippy and complicated, but his performance is supposedly quite good. And another film that premiered, I believe, yesterday that was right before Kiss the Spider Woman up at Eccles was Rebuilding, which stars Josh O'Connor, and I think resonated with a lot of people here because it's about a farmer rebuilding his livelihood and property after a major wildfire.
Man, Josh O'Connor, like the idea of Josh O'Connor playing a rancher sounds so crazy because he's so English, but also I kind of don't doubt him for anything. Like he was amazing in La Chimera, speaking Italian in half of it. Like I will follow him just about anywhere at this point.
Yeah.
A24 has a couple of the movies that we talked about, I think. If I Had Legs, I'd Kick You is a big one. Opus, which hasn't premiered yet. And they also have The Legend of Ochi, which is coming out in theaters in April, I think. And I got to see it ahead of the festival. And I think has gotten also a somewhat mixed response from people. It's this really inventive, set in this kind of fantasy, rocky northern island, and where there's these creature called the Ochi who live in the forest. And it has this entirely puppet, no CGI whatsoever creature who's like a baby who the girl main character played by Helena Zengel kind of goes on the lam with. And that creature is so cute and so charming. And the handmade nature of this movie and the design of it kind of has this like Wes Anderson is a broad brush, but kind of the way Wes Anderson films all kind of take place in a fictional world that is entirely his own. It kind of has that feel to it, even though the director, Isaiah Saxton, this is his first movie. So I was really won over by it. Willem Dafoe plays her father and is kind of like warm and scary in this way that Willem Dafoe is really excelling at lately. So I'm excited for people to see it. You know, I have kids and I take them to see many subpar animated movies, and having a live action one with this much imagination behind it was such a thrill. So I'm glad people are seeing it at Sundance, and I feel like people can look forward to that in April too. Well, before I ask you about your Oscar hot takes, which I want to do before you go, anything else that's still to premiere or that's yet to come for you that you're excited about as the festival continues?
There's a couple. You mentioned Opus, which is premiering tonight at the midnight screening. And I don't normally do the scary midnight screenings because I'm kind of a wimp for horror, but I've heard such good things about this. And it's got Ayo Edebiri from The Bear, and I'm really looking forward to seeing it. And there's another one I heard about that sounded scary to me, but I heard it was just fun and really engaging. It's called Lurker. And it's about a person who sort of gets into the entourage of a rock star who's just on the rise. And as the star rises, this person, you know, becomes more and more obsessed with maintaining their status in the entourage. And apparently some dangerous things arise from this situation. So
that's a good idea for a movie.
Entertaining. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, Alison, before you go and you get to go focus on these scrappy, beautiful indies with all of their hopes and dreams ahead of them, the Oscar nominations happened last week. You've been editing my columns on them, so we're up to date. Do you have any Oscar hot takes? Do you feel like the brutalist AI backlash is over? Do you feel like everyone's going to start getting mad at Nora next? Where are you on the Oscar race?
Isn't the brutalist AI backlash gone and now it's the Amelia Perez AI backlash plus?
I have to check my watch to see what time it is to see where we are in the backlash cycles.
You know, I think some of the things that you pointed out to me in your column last week have stuck with me as very interesting. The fact that all 5 lead actress performances are from nominated Best Pictures.
Yeah.
And I think I like that. I like when there's sort of a top down, like the quality is there throughout all these iterations, you know, versus these nominations, for wonderful performances like Judy and where Renee Zellweger, won for that. Those kinds of things are great too, but it's also nice to see a coherence where like the quality is coming through in all the different categories.
All these big movies that are considered like Best Picture worthy are about women, which doesn't happen every time.
Which is cool. And I mean, obviously there's so much momentum for Amelia Perez, and you know, now that we'll know a lot more when we see what the guilds have to say in these precursor awards. But it really does seem like that has a lot of momentum. And if that is the winner, it is going to definitely add to the dialogue culturally of, you know, Hollywood is so out of touch with what Americans believe and care about and want to hear stories about. And that's too bad, because I think it's amazing storytelling that's very surprising, and you don't have to have a trans person in your family or anything like that to sort of care about these characters and what happens to them. But I also was super surprised because I also edit our Ankler column Notable. So I've been very deep in with the song shortlist and the song nominees. I was really surprised that the Wild Robot song did not make the final 5. I know.
But yeah, Chris Bowers got nominated for his score, and I talked to him right before we had this recording, so I'll have more on that later. And he's like kind of very swiftly becoming a real stalwart in the score business, and it's the same music branch who votes for score and song. So it's like, what did you? I mean, the score is wonderful, so I get wanting to vote for that and not necessarily loving the song as much, but like they're so hand in hand. It was so funny to me.
And the song that, quote unquote, took its place is Like a Bird from Sing Sing.
Yeah.
And, we'd love to see Sing Sing get another nomination. That's, especially since it didn't make, Best Picture in the end, even though it was, I think probably on the bubble. And that's a beautiful song, but it really it's a quiet song and it had a quiet campaign. I mean, I didn't really hear a lot about it even during the campaign. So maybe it's the, people love Black Pumas, and one of the artists who worked on this song is one of the two guys from Black Pumas. That's like a real music people's, rock soul duo. So maybe that cut through in a way that wasn't as visible to those of us who are more focused on the film crafts. But
yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, Amelia Perez feels like it has a ton of momentum. I feel like there's still a good chance. I mean, you're the pundit. I'm more the observer, but I do feel like there's still a good chance. You could see Wicked. You could see Amelia Perez get a whole bunch of other things, and Wicked still get Best Picture. Those splits do happen, and as much as the composition of the Academy has changed in the past few years, there's still a large contingent there that loves a big, beautiful Hollywood movie, which Wicked definitely was.
Yeah.
And I don't know, have you gotten into the ranked voting thing at all on this podcast yet?
No, not too much. I wrote about it in the newsletter that you'll be editing. But yeah, the idea that that you don't just want a bunch of first place votes, you want a bunch of second and third, which is really helping movies maybe like Conclave or Complete Unknown that might have a broader base of people who like it, even if they don't love it the most. So that's an interesting question to ask for the next little while.
It sort of breaks your brain when you try and think about it too much of like averaging out the 3s and the 4s and the 10s and the but I do think as much momentum as Amelia Perez has, I wouldn't say it's a sure thing. Although again, the guilds will tell the story.
Yeah, we'll see if the newly arising backlash of people making parody movies about it or asking for their ticket, their money back from their movie tickets in Mexico, if any of that starts getting it. So every day a new Amelia Perez story seems to break. So we'll see where it takes us. Well, Alison, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking time away from your busy Sundance schedule to come help me understand it all. I've got a lot of good movies to put on the list.
Thanks for having me, Katey, and maybe we'll get you back out here to the snow next year.
I'll find my snow boots somewhere. That does it for this week's episode. We will have a lot of bonus episodes coming between now and the end of phase 2 of Oscar voting in mid-February. So keep an ear out. You never know when you might hear me next. This episode was edited by Brett Fuchs and produced by Brett Fuchs and me. Our theme music is by Dave Gonzalez. Thank you to my guest, Alison Brower, and to the Sundance Film Festival for giving us so much to talk about. You can subscribe to this podcast on Apple or Spotify, where you can watch a video version of today's podcast. And you can subscribe to the newsletter at theankler.com. We will see you next week.